This is Carla Hinton reporting for the Oklahoman and NewsOK.com. I'm here in the studio with the Reverend William Tabernet, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, and the Reverend Justin Lindstrom, Dean of St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral here in downtown Oklahoma City. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Well, we're here to discuss religion and the death penalty. I know that some members of the faith community and faith groups expressed themselves quite candidly about the death penalty in 2015, and now here in 2016, St. Paul's has made the topic a focus of its Evening of Listening for Public Forum series. The Oklahoma Conference of Churches is a co-sponsor of the forum.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about the forum itself. What is the name of it?
Yeah, we've called it Is the Death Penalty Nearing Its Death? And one of the reasons why we called it that is because we truly believe that there's movement towards abolishing the death penalty, and thinking about why that would be so. The reasons, from my faith background, would be that revenge is not something that we ought to seek. Politically and economically, the death penalty doesn't seem to serve the intended purpose. It's not a deterrent to crime. It's very expensive, and there's other things that we can do to actually help our society and culture.
Okay.
And so we're looking forward to tonight, 6:30 p.m. at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Okay. How about you, Reverend Tabernet?
Right. From our perspective, we really do believe that the death penalty is unchristian. I don't know whether you know it or not, but every one of the mainline churches has a statement against the death penalty, and has had that for a long time. So one of the things I sometimes say to members of congregations who are not quite sure as to what their view should be is I encourage them to read the statement that their church has made and say, well, if you're going to be a good Roman Catholic or a good Episcopalian or a good United Methodist or a good Baptist, then listen to and look at what your church actually says about that. And the main theological issue that relates to that seems to be the way in which Jesus talked about, well, you've heard it in the past, an eye for an eye, right, but I say to you. In other words, even within the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew scriptures, it was when something goes wrong in terms of revenge, it was only an eye for an eye, not more than an eye for an eye. Okay. But Jesus said not even an eye. And so for us to really follow in the footsteps of Jesus, then no matter how horrible the crime is, and nobody is discounting that some horrible crimes occur, then we have to acknowledge that God says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and that what we're about is rehabilitation, we're about restoration, we're not about vengeance, and we are about trying to be as caring even for the person who has committed this horrible crime. Now, we know, of course, that there are victims in the crime, and we would never want to underestimate the pain that is suffered by the families, and we want to support that. But to act as a society in exactly the same way as the bad crime that's been committed isn't the Christian thing to do either.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I know, Reverend Tabernet, you sent a letter to Governor Mary Fallin last year, I believe it was in April, about the death penalty. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Well, in fact, the statement that was made was a statement that was originally written even a couple of years earlier. Okay. And every bishop or head of communion, the head of the church in Oklahoma, signed that statement, saying some of the things that I just said about retribution, and calling on the state legislature to in fact do a study on the death penalty, not just theologically, but even on issues regarding how much it costs, because that's a big issue that we may even talk about. But then last year, you may remember, the case of Richard Glossop,
Right.
who now has been within minutes
Right.
of being executed 3 times already,
Right.
which is another interesting thing. As you probably know, I come from Australia,
Okay.
and almost 50 years ago, I was within 200 yards of the last execution in Australia, and that's 50 years ago.
Okay.
And since then, 187 other countries in the world have abolished the death penalty, and I think it's now 19 states in the United States have abolished it. So it's still surprising to me that we are still talking about the death penalty. But one of the things that, of course, was so horrific with the Richard Glossop case and the case the year before is the cocktail and the
Right.
injections and how all of that didn't work. So, in fact, in April of last year, we did go to see Governor Fallon and Archbishop Coakley, Bishop Konechny, and Bishop Girlinghouse, the Roman Catholic, Episcopalian, and Lutheran bishops of this state. Okay. And we had a very frank and I think fruitful discussion.
Okay. You know, you talked about other countries abolishing the death penalty. What's keeping America from doing that, well, in your opinion? Or maybe just get more specifically Oklahoma, because I know that there are states that have done it, right?
Right. Well, I think one of the issues is tough on crime.
Okay.
In other words, the feeling is still there that if you're not tough on crime, then people are going to commit these horrific acts.
Okay.
The facts, indeed, do not support that. In other words, the death penalty is only instituted and carried out for very horrific crimes, obviously. But most of those crimes are either crimes of passion or they're crimes committed in the process of committing another crime. Like if there's a person who is involved in a bank robbery and kills a guard on the way out, it's not that they necessarily thought about it beforehand, or even the act of passion where a boyfriend beats a girlfriend to death or something. And at that particular point, the evidence says people don't stop and say, oh, if I commit this crime, I might get the death penalty. Yeah. So it's not a deterrent. It doesn't work that way.
I think our society is focused on short-term relief.
Okay.
We think that crime's been committed. If the state or federal government then kills the criminal, that would relieve us somehow. And I think my God calls me into long-term transformation. Okay. And so I think what's hard for us to understand is to focus our energy and dollars into proactive causes, like investing in mental health issues, investing in education, job opportunities, and those kinds of things, which are long-term solutions, which we don't see immediate gratification from those.
Right.
We don't see immediate movement. It's going to take a long time to invest in those things and see changes in our society. But I think those things, investing in those sides of the issue, would actually be a greater deterrent to crime than the death penalty is. And actually the money that we spend on trying to convict someone and to put them to death, if we took that money and invested proactively, I think we would actually see crime go down, because people would have opportunities to work and have education. They would have the support of the state and cities with their mental health issues and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, another thing that people often say is that the death penalty brings some closure to the victims and the victims' families in particular. And again, it seems that even if that were to happen, that's a short-term solution for the people who've been grieving anyway, and that in general there's overwhelming evidence that ultimately the only way that people can get on with their lives is to forgive the person who's committed the crime. And again, that's totally within Christian theology and Christian practice, and that's hard, but it is something that we believe that society as a whole should aspire to, and with helpful counselling and spiritual care, that is what happens, because even when a victim's family has witnessed an execution or learns about it, even if they're not there themselves, the relief that they might get that it's over is only temporary, and so that doesn't really solve the problem.
Okay. You know, to my way of thinking, there are more and more people who are speaking out about the death penalty, either for or against.
Sure.
Why do you think that is happening, particularly in the faith community right now?
I think the faith community is being drawn upon by our governments to actually be more involved in community.
Okay.
Faith-based initiatives are being asked to do more and to be more involved, and we should be. We shouldn't have to be asked by the government to be involved. We should be doing that anyway,
Okay.
as faithful people and followers of God's love and grace. And so I think when we start analyzing what our faith is calling us to do and who we're supposed to be in community, in our city, in our metro area, in our state, in our national government, it is about long-term transformation.
Okay.
It is about God's love is open to all people, and how are we going to share that, teach that, be a part of that, and in a proactive, healthy, intentional way. And so I think our faith communities are coming together, especially through the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, pulling people together to listen to one another. We don't always agree.
Right.
You know, our theology comes from different places, but in the places where we can agree, I think that is an opportunity for us to have long-term transformation. Government tends to look at short-term relief. We're looking at long-term transformation, and so I think there's a good partnership there. And so I think you will see more people speaking out
Right.
against the death penalty, more people putting pressure on our government, state and national, and candidates running for office, to put more pressure on them to think through the long-term ramifications of us continuing to do this oppressive, oftentimes racially divided, economically divided, federal and state killing is basically what it is. And so I think you'll see more and more of the faith communities pressuring the government to do away with it.
Okay. Good.
Right. I think another issue is that people often think in a frontier type of mentality still, and saying, you know, the rule of the gun, and we need, you know, good marshals and sheriffs to keep society in place and to protect us. And while there's a certain amount of truth in that still, I believe, it's also true that we're much more sophisticated now. We have many more resources to keep society safe, and you can keep society safe even from the perpetrator of the most horrific crime by keeping that person in jail for life. So you can protect society. You don't have to kill the person to keep us safe.
I think we also, as a society, are getting tired of violence.
Yep.
Okay.
And the violence is all around us. And so for the state to carry out violent acts, it almost gives permission for the violence in our culture and society to continue. And so as a faith-based community, we're saying violence of any kind needs to come to an end. State-initiated violence, federally initiated violence, individual perpetrators, all violence, life against life, ought to end. And if the government can stop it, if the state can stop it, then we have a better opportunity of diminishing the violence within our own communities.
Okay. Interesting. It's an interesting topic,
Yes.
very thought-provoking, I must say. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Yes, so
Thank
welcome.
you. Appreciate the
Now
time.
tell me again of the time and the place.
Yes, St. Paul's Cathedral in Dean Willey Hall, 6:30 tonight.
Okay. All right.
Great.
This is Carla Hinton reporting for the Oklahoman and NewsOK.com.